Just to introduce myself, I'm Ali Campbell. I'm a youth and children's ministry consultant, and I've been involved in various ways with youth and children's ministry for 32 years now, which is, no, it's not, it's 34. Every time I say a year, obviously another year disappears really quickly. So, and the older you get, the more that happens. So 34 years and counting. I love it still. I'm, as well as doing consultancy, so that's supporting churches and youth and children's workers through mentoring and supervision. I also am a volunteer in my own church and continue to do both children's and youth work, but not with the overall responsibility of it on the ground in my own community, which is liberating and a joy, I have to say, but also still very exciting to be involved in, when I can be, face-to-face work. Our session is about the future of youth ministry, and I'm just going to kick off with some observations from thinking about the last year and some of the things I've observed through the support I've offered, things I've done around the country in different ways to help people as they've navigated this time, but also just observations that may feed into what we're thinking about as we move forward. So just want to kick off with a bit from Scripture. So you led me through the waters, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there, Psalm 77:19. Just that idea of a pathway no one knew was there, it feels like just the right kind of thing to be thinking about now. The difference, of course, for the psalmist was he was thinking about something that had happened, and it was with hindsight reflecting back on it. As we're navigating our way forward, it's as if we're saying, Lord, we need you to make a way, because we don't know what things are going to look like, how we're going to navigate our way forward. It's as if we're stood there with Moses and the people, Pharaoh's armies behind us. We know we're supposed to go somewhere, but we can't see how we're going to get across, make a way. And then the Lord does it. And there's a sense in which I think we're waiting perhaps for the Lord to make a way. What's going to happen? And we don't know. I guess what I could have said at the start was, this isn't going to be a session where I tell you what it's going to look like. It's more a case of, let's explore, have some thinking together around my observations, maybe some of your observations. And then there are some things I think we need to have as features, but I'm not going to share with you a program of activity or something that's going to make sense of everything as we come out of lockdown and we start to move back towards something like doing some face-to-face on a regular basis, which is my prayer and hope that we can do. But that's obviously going to involve socially distancing for quite some considerable time, at least to the autumn, I think, if not into next year, as there'll still be quite a large percentage, certainly of young adults who won't have been vaccinated by the time we hit the autumn, I wouldn't have thought. So still lots of challenges ahead, and it's been a year. So I want to share some observations. Then it'd be great to have some chat with you about what your observations have been as we think back over this last year. So I'm just going to kick off with those and then see what you guys think as well. First thing I've observed is this need to live with it. I don't know if you can remember the first lockdown. I looked at it and thought, this is going to be temporary. We're going to be out of this soon. It's going to be fine. That was a year ago. You know, my last face-to-face thing where I was doing consultancy work for a church was the middle of March last year. I've done everything else since then via Zoom, phone calls, remotely in some way. And certainly in terms of training and what I generally offer in other ways, that's been really challenging. Lots of things cancelled, having to rejig and rethink about what I was going to do. But then always with that thought of this won't be long. And it's been a year, which actually is a long time, really, when we start to think about it. And we're not done yet. So this living with it is, I guess, in my own spirit, getting to a point where I have to accept that there's things that have changed and are changing, and we're going to have to live with this sort of change and the way things are different. And I think when I first went into lockdown, my thought was, right, I'll start planning for when we come out of it. And so my focus wasn't on living with it and being where we are. My focus was, what am I going to do when we're not having to do this? And I think there's a real challenge for us. There's still this tension of preparing for what's to come, which we don't know what that's going to look like, but at least we feel as if we've got some control over that, even if it is just our planning, even if right now we think, I don't know what's happening, I'm just going to have to, you know, hope that we get where we want to be. And if my attention is all on what could be or what I'd like to be doing, I can miss what's going on right now. And I think I did that for a while, kept thinking about what I could do that I couldn't do anymore, without sort of sitting with what is. And I think there is a challenge for us. It's a reflective practice thing, really, to sit with what is and just ask God, what are you doing now? How can I engage with where you are now, with the young people I'm working with what's going on in my own spirit, with how I'm feeling about youth ministry? To what extent do I need to live with what's happening and just sit with it for a bit and ask God to speak to me in the here and now, and try not to continue to think about what I want things to look like in the future? Now, that's a real challenge, I think, but it's important as a bit of practice, I think, to have a go at doing that. The other thing I've observed is that this kind of sense of everything's quite fluid. So you kind of set something. So first lockdown, we did a few things, and then it all changed, and then we could kind of do a little bit of stuff face to face. Kids were back at school for a while. Then all that changed again. The restrictions kept changing. The different categories kept changing. Everything was fluid, and it was all stuff being done to us. It wasn't choice. So a lot of what we were doing was reacting to what other people were saying we could now do or not do. Masks, no masks in school, social distancing being 2 meters, 1 meter plus. I mean, make your mind up is what I kept thinking. Help us at least to kind of get a grip on what we're supposed to be doing from one moment to the next. And then with the fantastic help of the National Youth Agency, if you've not seen their support, the stuff that they've put out, they've just done another, beginning of March, did another webinar, which was brilliant, around how we can navigate our way forward through these stages that are now coming. But in all of that, we've needed to be fluid and flexible. And I guess my observation is, if we're having to do that now, and we're having to perhaps do that going into the future, how much should that potentially just shape our practice anyway? So is there a need to think more fluidly about what youth ministry looks like, where we engage with young people, when we engage with young people, and the shape of things? When you've got an actual time and a physical space in a building, it's quite set. Even if you change the activities you do, young people know it's this time, it's in this place. But with things online, or with things, you know, a flexibility around maybe doing a bit detached or going for a walk and seeing who you bump into, socially distanced, of course, there's this fluid nature that's come into our practice. And I'm just wondering, does that need to hang around a bit? And do we need to keep that sense of fluidity? The other thing that's come into sharp focus for me is the home. And, you know, it's familiar to have children's and family workers at churches. It's far less familiar to have youth and families workers at churches or anywhere else, to be honest. And as somebody who's always done both, I've never been able to pick. In fact, when I was leading some stuff in different contexts, I've always been asked, when are you going to pick between children's and youth work? And I've always said, I can't pick. I love it all. You know, gimme, you know, work with 0 to 18s. I love it. I love seeing a whole generation through, rather than just thinking, right, I'll work with this group or that group. We're all different, and your calling may be different to mine, but there's a real sense for me of wanting to work with a generation and see them through. So I've never been able to pick. But it's only in the last decade I've started to think more about the home. And then that has really come into sharp relief during this time. Because, you know, whatever we're trying to do, a majority of our young people's time during this last year has been in the home, whatever that environment is like. So for some of our young people, it's a fantastic place, and they've strengthened their relationships with their family, brothers and sisters, parents, all the rest of it. For others, the home is a place of really not positive encouragement, a place where they don't want to be, and has just caused immense stress and anxiety about being stuck there. But the home, regardless of its influence, has shaped the young people's experience this last year. I guess that my question is it going to help shape our practice going forward? Often youth ministry, it seems to me, operates in a vacuum. We work with the young people. We're sometimes not great at intergenerational ministry because we think we need to do youth work. And there's nothing wrong with that, except I think we're poorer for it if we don't look at ways of connecting the generations. And if we don't have a holistic view of youth ministry, so thinking about the home and its place in our work, I think we're missing something significant that should be shaping and informing our practice. And I've observed the home coming into greater focus during this pandemic because it's where our young people have spent a majority of their time. Something else I've spotted just from conversation with people is online collaboration, with young people getting involved in that as well. And just, trying to put stuff together for church. We've got church leaders perhaps not familiar with either Zoom or YouTube. And so there's been creative stuff happening, and lots of young people have been part of that process in some of the churches I've been supporting. So, from editing to doing video stuff out in the street for Vox Pop stuff for church or whatever it is, young people getting involved in that, and maybe teaching, training older adults in their church around how to use technology and use digital stuff and make things work. So there's this whole collaborative nature of things. I don't know about your churches, but there's been far more people involved in making church happen than would be if we were physically present together. Just the collab that's needed to happen in order to make church happen, far more people involved in the process. And I do hope in some ways that continues into the future, even when we're back together. Why does it need to be one person up the front leading, one person preaching, and the band look a certain way, or whatever it is that we have in terms of face-to-face stuff and when we're in church? And then something I've also spotted is what I would say is generous engagement. The number of Christian agencies and people in youth work and children's work finding space online to talk together and engage with each other. Because none of us have been here before, it's like everybody's been going, what are you doing? Tell us what you're doing. How are you doing it? I've no idea what I'm doing. Do you know what you're doing? I don't. And everybody having that kind of conversation, whether it's online or whether you phone somebody up and do it. I've seen a generous engagement right across the board where people are talking to others that they wouldn't necessarily ever meet. I mean, this is a great space today where we're encountering people we may never have met. And I know there's a crowd of you from Sheffield and, immediate area perhaps, but there's also people from all over the country that have joined today, which is fantastic. And we'll all have different theological positions, different values, different ways of approaching ministry. And yet I have seen through this year a generous engagement with others. And my prayer is we wouldn't go back into our silos as we come out of this, but continue to be in those relationships, continue to seek to learn from each other, and recognize that, there's no ego stuff here. None of us know what we're doing, and we can't pretend to. Oh yes, when I was involved in the last pandemic, this is what we did. None of us have done it. So it's great for us just parking egos at the door and learning from each other. And I've found that to be brilliant with the different people I've managed to engage with online predominantly, but also phoning up people I haven't spoken to for years just to say, how are you doing? Isn't life crazy? And being able to share some stories about what's happening. And lastly, from me in terms of observations, well-being and emotional health, just my own. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges for us just thinking about how we do ministry is so much of our time is spent trying to look at how we resource other people. How am I supporting them? How do I nurture my young people during this time? How do I make sure they're okay? How do I make sure I'm providing for my family and doing them okay? How do I make sure I'm connecting with my team? And actually our own well-being, our own emotional health can just be parked because we're used to resourcing and supporting others. And I think if I would say anything that you get out of this time as you think about navigating your way forward and what the future of youth ministry looks like, be kind to yourself. The fact you've turned up today in the midst of life and everything else that's happening is a win. Even if you think, I'm not doing much, I'm just rocking up to a couple of these seminars, I'm dipping in and out, but you're here, and that's fantastic. And maybe you felt like, why? I know why I'm going to bother on Saturday. I've got other things to do. There's family, there's stuff, there's life. I'm tired. I'm just not going to bother. But here you are, which is brilliant. So be kind to yourself and take time to look after yourselves. There's a brilliant picture that's been shared a lot, I think, over this last year of, I don't know if you know from being in a plane, but if you travel with children or young people, there's an encouragement. If there's a drop in cabin pressure and you have to put your face mask on, There's an encouragement to adults to put your face mask on first before you then put one on a child, because you're no use to them if you pass out and they need you. And there's a sense in which we can often be thinking about prioritizing other people, but to be of the most help, we sometimes need to look after ourselves. And the best thing I think we can offer our young people and our teams is a healthy us. That's not a perfect us, don't get me wrong, but a healthy us is about just recognizing when we need something and taking time out to receive it, and feeling okay about that and not guilty. Recognizing that I need to feed myself, I need to recognize I need a break, I need to ask my church leader, give me a bit of space here, I can't cope. We're all having that happen. I don't know about you, but I'm also working probably at about 75% of what I would normally think of should be 100, but I can't do 100 at the minute. So the world and the work and everything else has to cope with 75%. I think that's true for lots and lots of us. So be kind to yourself. Look after your own well-being and emotional health. And as we go into whatever is next, we need to carry those thoughts with us, I think. So those are my observations. We're going to take a pause because I want to hear from you. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Any thoughts you have, any observations you've made over this last year, things that have struck you that you think maybe you need to carry on into whatever we do next?
My biggest observation is just the fact that the whole church seems to have found its way online, where before it was reserved the big churches or kind of well-financed ones, and even the small traditional chapels have found their way to be online and reaching out to more people. I think that's certainly something we need to continue. And it's also we realise actually when my youth group can't meet or there's something going on, actually we can still meet if we have Zoom, and they'll still buy into that and join it, even though we can't be meeting in the building.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan. Anyone else? Observations?
I think it's been quite difficult to maintain relationships through Zoom. You don't get the same vibe, that same relational kind of conversations that you, or just kind of noticing if someone's a bit quiet. It's possible, but it's harder to lead those sessions, especially, you know, if everyone's a bit quiet that day. And yeah, that's, I mean, we've managed and we've retained all our young people, but it's physically, you know, and there's Zoom fatigue, and you get off, you know, you've only sat there looking at a screen and you come away and you're like, oh, actually that was actually physically harder than expected. So yeah.
Thanks, Mel. I love doing workshops and training. I hate this because we're not in the same space. I think, you know, the stuff you'd normally have would be a bit of banter, not necessarily everybody listening to what you're saying, which obviously I can't tell with the people that for whatever reason aren't on video, and that's absolutely fine, but it's just a different dynamic. So you kind of like, I don't know what's going on for people, everybody can look at me and I don't know what's happening. And for somebody leading a workshop or a session, that's really weird, because I'm used to kind of more engagement and stuff happening instead of like, come off your mic, I can't hear you, you're muted. All of that stuff that we do constantly is draining and saps our energy. But I think relationships key. We're going to come on to how important connection is, and I think that's a key feature of how we need to think about how we navigate our way forward. Any other observations from people?
Just kind of building on that, I found it's been really hard to make new relationships. So I'm doing a master's in children and youth at the moment, and I've not met any of the people that I'm doing my master's with in person, because it's all online. And so in terms of trying to make relationships and kind of going, well, actually you're in a different part of the country, so I could learn from you, but I've never met you, and things, and it can get very, very difficult to kind of have those sort of conversations that you would normally have over coffee. And also for some churches, one of the churches I'm in, they've just closed down the youth group completely because they don't know how to operate it online. So we're going to have like a sort of a whole year at least, maybe longer, where we've just not had a youth group. because we were in the middle of rebranding it anyway. So we've just gone, oh, well, we'll just hold off and see what COVID does, not expecting that a year and a bit later that we probably won't be able to engage with the same kids, and that we'll need to almost create a brand new youth group in whatever context that looks like.
Yeah, I think re-establishing relationship and then starting new ones are going to be two of the key challenges going forward. Yeah. Any other observations?
I had my camera off because I've just broken the kitchen door. So just trying to repair it downstairs. So I've had to move. That's why I have my camera off. I think we've really found that there were things that were really good before lockdown, and like as you get to like the annual anniversaries of things like weekends away or holidays, we've really thought like, oh, normally we'd be doing this. And I think although we need to be focusing on what we're doing now, I think it's really helped to look back at what we were doing before and think that wasn't that good, actually, we could improve that. That might have been wasted energy or wasted time, whereas there's things that we've done that were really good that we know, even though it will be different, that's what we want to aim for again, because it really was good. Yeah,
brilliant, thank you. I think this is real time of reflection. We can be panicking about what we're not doing, or like I said at the beginning, spending so much time thinking about what's coming, what could happen, and not taking time to sit with what is. But in the sitting with what is, if we can be reflective, just as you've said, Amelia, there's things that we can be looking at. That was great, that really wasn't. I'm glad we've stopped that. And we maybe have been forced to stop it, but we're not going to start it again because it just wasn't working. So all of that, I think, is really good learning we should be doing. So that's great, thank you. Any other observations?
Yeah, just off the back of that, it's obviously something we've all missed this year has been the kind of the big summer festivals, which could be like a real linchpin moment in a lot of our ministries. Is that's where sometimes some of the big step changes happen. And it's certainly a lot of the supply seems it builds up to that event in the summer. And not only that, it's just kind of the refreshment that comes from that as well. A person who's a leader, that's a really kind of uplifting time, kind of carries it. So without that, I've been forced to try and find different ways of refreshing myself, which I hope is building habits that I can continue forward. But it's also really realised we need to have more of those moments just within our ministry, not just be waiting for that big step change at some point in the summer. That we need to be kind of providing more space for that to happen on a smaller scale throughout the year.
Yeah, brilliant. I think the challenge for us is, I mean, certainly when I've gone to big things, be it Soul Survivor or even in our church context, we're thinking and hoping we can go to satellites if that happens in Peterborough this year. But just thinking and planning about those things, part of the excitement is, I don't mind doing cooking and sorting tents out. It's great not to lead the program, lead the worship, facilitate everything. You can go and be with your young people. And actually the richness of relationship that gets developed in those environments, because we're not thinking about running it, we can be, and it's the conversations around making food together, walking backwards and forwards to the venues where the stuff of life gets talked about. And that's where I think we see so much growth happen in our relationships, but also in that, the stuff that matters for the young people as we journey with them. So that's huge that's missing from our lives. But I think trying to ask some questions about what do we need to build in for ourselves is really important. Where do I get refreshed and restored? And where do our young people develop those spiritual disciplines and engage in those habits that we hope they pick up from being in this huge environment with lots of others, see a bunch of other people worshipping in ways where you can tell they're worshipping because their whole body's engaged with it. And then maybe some of our young people are nervous or anxious about doing that. There's 1,000 other young people doing it as well, so they just feel a little bit more comfortable sticking their hands in the air or bouncing around. All of those things, kind of, we can look at that and think, man, it'd be great to be doing that again. So again, part of sitting with it, I think, is also having that sense of loss and a little bit of mourning and sitting with kind of lament about what we can't do and what we're missing. And I think when we come back, part of what's going to be important is having those kind of conversations with our young people. My own daughter, for example, is year 8. I nearly said year 7, but she never finished year 7 because it kind of ended, and then she wasn't back at school. And then she started in September, And there was that brief period where they were back, and then they were back out of not being in school. And she keeps talking about being in year 7. And I'm like, no, you're year 8 now. But she never finished year 7. It's supposed to be a trip that was going to happen at the end of the summer term. They're going down to London doing exciting things. It never happened. So there is some sitting with that stuff with our young people, the things they've lost, and creating space when we do come back together for them to, you know, say that, you know, I really miss that we didn't do this. This was going to happen. It never happened. And sit with it. We can't fix it, but we need to hear what our young people feel about those things and engage with them in those spaces, whilst also being hopeful and planning and thinking about, well, what could we do together? How could we create something where we have a dynamic and create a memory that they love, that it may not be what they were hoping it would be, but we do some stuff together, having listened and engaged with them and thinking about what's going on for them as part of this process. Any other observations?
The young people that I work with, particularly, that they're doing all right. They're okay. They're resilient and they're coping. Sometimes possibly better than the people around them. But that's been a real encouragement, actually, that good things are happening, and this is going to be a strengthening thing for them when we come out of it.
Great. Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I think young people are going to be different in different contexts. I think I mentioned, you know, for those that have been in the home a lot and the home's not been a good place, they may just be so excited that school is back. For others, you know, school's not a safe place. They feel bullied or threatened. They don't fit in. So actually the home has been a place where they thrived and flourished. So we're just going to have to work with the tension of having young people in both those spaces. Some feeling excited, now they can go back to school. Others feeling anxious about that prospect, and everything in between. And we've got to navigate that as best we can, whilst getting alongside young people with what's going on for them. I want to mention, moving on from the observations, some key patterns I think need to be part of our work going forward. And this is more where I'm thinking, not activity as such, but what values or things need to underpin our work going forward, that for me is about what youth ministry should look like going into the future. And seeing as that's the title of this session, it would be good to just explore that a little bit with you. And also get your sense of whether you resonate with those, or whether you would think there's different things that we need to be thinking about as we go forward, and what those might be. So I'm going to jump back to share screen. Hopefully I'm only going to be a few minutes rattling through these, and then again see what you guys think in terms of what should shape what we do from now in terms of the way we think about our practice. And I emphasize, I'm not talking about particular activities. It's more the values that underpin the way that we work and how that shapes, you know, the way we look at the ministry that we're running. So jumping back in. So a paradigm shift is literally like a new pattern. So I'm thinking, what are the new patterns of work that we need to be thinking about in terms of our shape as we do youth ministry? Somebody asked Seth Godin a little while ago, you know, what's the future look like? You know, what's going on for the, you know, what do you think it's going to be like? And he said this, and the future's already here. And people, he said, were disappointed with that answer. But partly what he was saying was, look, some of the things that you think are in the future are here. You just haven't paid attention. So for him, the future's here 15 years ago. It's just whether or not we're living into it and recognizing it is present, and we should be doing something about it. So in the observations, I'd already mentioned about the significance of the home. I want to just say again, I really think as we develop youth ministry going forward, that the family is key, and how we engage with the family is key. Again, sometimes in youth ministry, we can be slightly siloed or in a bit of a vacuum with our practice. How do we build relationship with the family and engage with the home? And by that, I mean, we need to be working with the home. We need to be supporting young people in their homes. We need to be creating space for ministry with families in our youth ministry. And it should be a key part of our pattern. And I partly say that thinking about faith formation and discipleship. The key influencers in children and young people's lives in terms of their faith formation, what they're going to believe as they grow up, are their parents and those in their home. I mean, all the stats, all the research tells us that. From Theos's work a few years ago, which is a big think tank, they did a piece of work called Passing It On. And you can find that piece of research if you just Google Theos and Passing It On. You know, like 40 research projects they looked at where loads of data had been gathered, and they came up with that kind of, one of their summary points was the family's key, and parents in particular, in terms of faith formation. If that's true, and yet families and parents have no kind of feature at all in terms of our thinking about our youth ministry, what are we missing? And why are we missing it? I really think we need to think that through as practitioners. In children's ministry, it's a given that you're going to work with the family. Why is that not the case with youth work? I think it's really important we sit, again, in the process of reflective practice, sit with that and ask ourselves some questions. For me, it's key. As a parent, it's become more important to me, you know, thinking about my own teenage daughters and the impact that I have in terms of how I'm living my faith and how I'm engaging. And I'm looking to be involved as a volunteer as well, alongside the youth worker, in partnering with the home and looking at how the home features in our practice and our thinking about our practice, so that parents are on this journey together with us as we navigate kind of what happens next, life with their kids. And for me, as understanding the home just creates a more holistic view of the world for that young person and what's going on for them. You know, whether the home is positive or negative, you know, tells me some things about what their life is like. And if it sometimes it feels as if we're trying to do discipleship in this 40 minutes, you know, which has now turned into a half an hour Zoom, or whatever it is that we're trying to do when we meet with them. And yet there's so much more going on in their lives that maybe we're not connected with, that informs the way they engage with our practice and the work that we're doing. So it's just, for me, the home is, and the family is about broadening our perspective and looking out beyond our engagement just with young people, but thinking about the wider context that they find themselves in. And the second thing for me that's really important is the prophetic. I don't know if you've spotted this with things that are going on in culture, but Black Lives Matter, for example, when that was huge and beginning to really kick off in the summer last year, particularly at the death of George Floyd, there was a young person in our town, who 18 years old, who decided we'd have a gathering at Castle Field in Clitheroe. She was 18, she got it together, 250 people came, we all took the knee, we had different speakers talking about racism in our own communities, in the Northwest particularly, and it was a really inspiring, encouraging, whilst also saddening event, just to think about some of the challenges people continue to face in our society. But this 18-year-old from one of the sixth forms just sorted it out and made it happen. Half the people there were teenagers, caring about this, really interested, but wanting to see something done. And it was a bit sad for me to see so few from the church, so few from my own church, but just generally I felt I'm not spotting people as I look around that are part of the church community. And that's one aspect. Another one was just thinking about the climate challenge that we face and young people's concern for how we're stewarding the planet. And again, I think young people saying to the church, what are you doing about it? When are we going to step up as the church and care about the world, you know, that we were given to steward? If you've not watched it, the burning down the house stuff from Tear Fund and Youthscape, if you look, if you Google burning down the house Tear Fund and then find that page, there are some really powerful testimonies from young people that are just challenging the church, and they're so inspiring, they're encouraging, they're prophetic in what they're saying, and the church needs to pay attention. So I think just the medium, like Dan's already mentioned about, we're online more, there's churches doing online stuff that wouldn't have been otherwise. Just the way that young people can be participating and engaging. Are we paying attention to their prophetic voice? And I guess, is their prophetic voice going to shape for us what youth ministry looks like going forward? So we need to listen to and give space for the prophetic voice of young people, pattern aspects of our work for young people around the themes of these two key things for me, justice and stewardship. I think they're really important. And how do we tap into those and do those well? And sometimes the thing is we can kind of default to like, well, let's talk about justice. And then we immediately make it about something else. But what if we sat there with some of the things that young people are genuinely concerned about that aren't just in our society? And what are we going to do about it? What does God say about justice? What does God say to us about stewardship? How do we bring in the story of God into those things that young people, particularly that I've seen in this last year, they really care about? And then I guess the other thing that's linked a bit with summer festivals that we've already talked about is, are our young people equipped? And by that I mean, you know, we've already mentioned, Mel's mentioned the resilience of the young people that have engaged regularly with stuff that has been happening, that they've been running. But there's also this aspect to it that the young people are reliant on perhaps our input or our engagement, or at least from our perspective, they're reliant upon it. I must do this for our young people. I must do these things for our young people. I'm just wondering if we flip it. What if more of our time was focused on how to equip young people when they're not with us than was focused on the energy we put into creating our content or running our programs? And that's a hard switch to make, but I just think that it's a bit like Youthscape's new events called Satellites, which hopefully is going to kick off in Peterborough in the summer. But the reason it's called Satellites is to get the message across to young people that we are satellites revolving around God, and he's the centre. God is the focus. And sometimes I think in my own practice, I've made young people the centre, and everything's revolved around what do they need, what do they want. You know, I used to run a camp, and some of the youth groups would come and they would throw the tents on the ground and they would say to the young people, build your tent. Others would turn up the night before, make all the tents, put the sleeping bags and stuff in the young people's tents, fold down the sleeping bag, plump their pillow and put a chocolate on the pillow for their young people when they turned up, like they're in a hotel. And I think sometimes our discipleship looks a bit like one of those. You know, let's do everything we can for them. But how do we equip them so that when they're not with us, they love reading the Bible? When they're not with us, they're phoning up their friends to pray with them. I just think there's something around how do we equip them for when they're not with us that needs to become a bigger feature of our work. We can't get, at the moment, we're not going to be able to do 34, I don't know how many you've got that you would love to gather as a crowd. Some of us have small youth groups, some of us have big, some of us have medium. Some of us feel like, I don't currently have a youth group. I don't know what's going to happen when we come back. There may be nobody and I have to start from scratch. We're all in different places, but it won't look the way it's looked. And I think some of the stuff we need to be working on is equipping young people for when they're not with us, giving them tools that help them journey with God when things look like we don't know. Things are uncertain. Things are shaky. And young people are disciplined. That's the thing. I think with spiritual disciplines, we can think they're not disciplined, but the amount of time they're on social media, or they make time to binge watch the latest thing on Netflix, or they're up to speed with WandaVision before I've had a chance to watch the next episode, or whatever it is that they're doing. It's just like, you know, they are disciplined. It's just the things that they're choosing to focus on. How do we nudge their energy into, you know, thinking about, I'm going to pray, I'm going to read the Bible, I'm going to see how God wants me to witness to my friends today, however that's going to work. So I just wonder if there's something around the equipping that we need to think about beyond just creating this fantastic space for them when they're with us, but beginning to push into how you're going to apply this the rest of the week. What's this going to look like when you're not here? And how do we tool them up with things that will help them navigate the rest of their week? And some of that, we might give them things to do and they come back and reflect next week, the stuff that they've done or the stuff they haven't done, and we try and explore that with them together. But I really think we've got to press into this idea of equipping them for when they're not with us, because so much of what we're doing, I think, is going to be fluid and uncertain, and we can't have a program where you've got to rely on us for the delivery. And maybe that's right, actually, and we need to think about doing a different thing where we journey with young people. So it's equipping young people for when they're not with us is more important than doing what we do in the room or on the Zoom. I really believe that. It's hard to make it part of our practice. And then finally, just a couple of thoughts before we have a little chat about some of those things. Mark Yaconelli, 15 years ago now, wrote Contemplative Youth Ministry. If you've not read it, I really encourage you to grab that book. It's a fantastic book for thinking about what youth ministry is and for. And then this book's just come out last year, The End of Youth Ministry by Andrew Root. And he basically, to sum up the book, youth ministry is for joy. And there's something about being with and journeying with young people that is the reason I still do it, if you like, 34 years later. It's actually the delight of being with young people. When I distill it down, why do I still love it? It's because young people are amazing. They are wonderful and crazy and frustrating and brilliant all at the same time. And there's something about being with that we need to engage with, to receive God's power to be changed, transformed. And the contemplative youth ministry thing from 15 years ago, Mark Yaconelli basically said this: we don't know how to be with God, we don't know how to be with each other, and we don't know how to be with young people. And I was just thinking, wow, that speaks to me today about where we're at right now. And that idea of being with is really important. Being with is more important than doing to or doing with. Sometimes just being present is the statement that we need to make to young people. This is the journey. We're on it together. We're here with you. We're for you. We're going to go with you. And we're not sure what things are going to look like, but we're here. And the be with is where I think a lot of the stuff that Dan talked about, the kind of stuff that happens at festivals. And then I think a lot of the be with stuff is where change takes place and where stuff really happens for young people, when we have the space to be with each other. So part of that for me is about how we share stories and how we reflect on the stories of what has happened and what's taken place for us and how we do that going forward. A guy called John Westerhoff says we're a story-formed people. If you've not read his stuff, really encourage you to do that. He wrote a book back in the 80s now called Will Our Children Have Faith? And he's got a little model around how faith is formed. I really encourage everybody to read his stuff, John Westerhoff. But he says this: we're a story-formed people. And youth ministry should not be about competing in this kind of arena of things, like all the things we're competing against to make stuff happen. And we're trying to lure young people to this because it's more important than all the other things that they're attracted to. So that kind of competitive nature that we can get into. This is more important than sports club. Why is it? If they love sports, or this is more important than this, or this is more important than that, come to these things that we're doing. And instead, profoundly conserve ourselves with stories. And it's as we live our story and as we share stories together, I think God does stuff when we come together and we inhabit the story, his story, which is going back to the psalm that we shared, is what the psalmist is doing is remembering the story of God and what God has done. And we should be spending our time doing that with our young people as we celebrate who they are and celebrate what God's doing. Yes, do I miss stuff like this? Absolutely. I used to be part of an event I ran in Sussex for a number of years, and this is just a glimpse of the sun coming in as the sun was setting and a bunch of young people. I'm taking the photo, so they're not enthralled by what I'm saying. Somebody else is engaging them very well from the front. But in terms of the environment is just amazing. Just amazing to be in that space with young people. And I think there's a real sense of loss that we've not been able to do some of that. And yet all of that is about connection. So just to finish my bit, we need to treasure connection. So re-establishing it, starting new relationships, it is about connection. And the next phase of kind of what youth ministry looks like is about rebuilding and beginning new connections with people, and to treasure those, you know, as precious relationships, and trust that God's got what's coming. Some of those things I hope I've shared, the prophetic, the equipping young people for they're not with us, and engaging with the family, I think need to be key aspects of what our practice looks like, but they're more kind of values that underpin it than activity. This is key though, treasuring the connections that we have and we build. Okay, thoughts. Maybe you agree with some of those. Maybe you think, no, I don't agree with that. This is what it should look like, or these are the values that should underpin our practice going forward. But thoughts or comments?
I really liked what you said about equipping young people for the rest of the week. There are so many kids or young people that we work with that are from non-Christian homes. I was one of those where I would go to a Christian union once a week and I'd hear all this amazing stuff about the Bible, and then I'd go home that day and I'd be like, Mum, I've heard this. And she just kind of wouldn't be interested and wouldn't engage with it. And so I'd just be like, okay. And then kind of that would be it until the next week when I got more input. But kind of those bits in between are almost more important than the sort of hour you get with that in that group. And so kind of particularly as we're becoming a less Christian society, I suppose it is important that if they are in non-Christian homes, understanding how they can interpret the Bible, and also just having the resources. I've run a youth group where kids, the young people who come didn't have Bibles. So telling them to go home and read a Bible, well, that just wasn't going to happen because there wasn't any Bibles in the house. And so kind of understanding that it's not necessarily normal to have Bibles in the house, and not everybody is a Christian. And so how do we engage with young people from those non-Christian backgrounds?
Yeah. And I think also it's not assuming that they know what they're going to do. So even when we say things like, why don't you pray about this at home? How many of our young people think, I don't know how to pray? How many young people just don't know what that looks like? I mean, if you think about Jesus' disciples, these are kids that have grown up in a Jewish environment. They know the scriptures. They maybe didn't quite get there, which meant they weren't already called by a Pharisee or a teacher. And there's a bit of stuff around that in terms of the context for young Jewish boys and what was expected of them. You know, they were other things, fishermen, tax collectors, etc. But when they're called and they're following, it's a little bit while after that they say to Jesus, teach us how to pray. And that's from observing Jesus praying. And so a question, I think, a challenge for us in terms of our practice is how much is what they see us doing as opposed to what they see us telling them? You know, so do we model prayer? Do we model what it looks like to kind of open the Bible? And do we do what we would do if we were at home on our own and just model it and talk about it? And that sometimes is the most helpful stuff we can do. Why are we assuming they know? You know, they've not a clue where to find John in the Bible. So we just say, when you read this at home, they can't find it. They're not going to bother looking for it. Or some of our kids don't read anything. So they don't open a book at home. Why would they read the Bible? So it's just some of that stuff I think we need to practice when we're with them, which is different from teaching them about the Bible and prayer, is doing it with them and actually spending a session where we're just going to do this. And you might think this is so simple, but if they've never seen it done, how do they know that? How do they know it's straightforward and let's just do this together and find out together? Anyway, yeah. Absolutely. I think that stuff needs to feature. Even with kids that have grown up in the church, what are we assuming they know that they just don't know? Other thoughts or observations?
Just a question. You said something earlier about kind of intergenerational ministry, and kind of certainly when we do, I know the typical thing is children and families, but there's very rarely youth and families. There's obviously the kind of teenage angst thing that all the teenagers don't want to be anywhere near their mum and dad. But actually, we're looking at kind of restarting kind of a family style services in our church where we can do back. And something we're struggling in the minute is think, how do we engage teenagers in that? Have you got any kind of good tips or ideas about actually how you do effectively engage teenagers in that intergenerational type stuff, so they don't just become a kind of their own cluster in amongst everyone else?
Yeah, have them lead stuff. I mean, have them lead stuff. If you're going to break into groups, have them facilitate group discussion. I mean, some of this stuff does need a little bit of training, a little bit of input. but do that. Get the generations praying for each other, which involves everybody. And one of the most powerful things you can do when you do get back to face-to-face stuff, just in normal church, is, you know, taking 5 minutes. If kids go out to groups and that's the kind of normal practice, fine. But take 5 minutes before people go out to get the generations to pray for each other. Literally, grandparenty age people, adult age people, singles, married, doesn't matter. It's just about the generations praying for each other, and then kids and young people, and get them praying for each other. It takes like a minute or two. Just ask the grandparents' age, you know, 60 plus, however you want to couch it. Stick your hands out and pray for the next generation. Then the next generation does that. Then the kids are prayed for. And then we turn it round and the kids and young people pray for the adults. They pray for their own parents if they're sat next to them. The parents pray for the grandparents in the church. Honestly, it's the most powerful prayer stuff I've ever seen ever in the church. And we do it so infrequently. It's one way to do intergenerational stuff straight off the bat that connects people, is to pray for each other. So I'd really encourage that. Do meals together where young people make the food, serve the food, bless others, and vice versa. There's lots of ways, I think, of doing intergenerational stuff. There are young people volunteering, doing D of E, doing all kinds of things that they would normally be doing, but they're trying to find ways of doing that in other ways at the moment. What are things they can volunteer and join in where they're adults doing it as well? Food bank stuff. Doing things with kids groups where young people, I mean, we've got a great kids group and young people volunteer and are part of that. So there's intergenerational stuff. We've got older people leading it, we've got young people helping, and we've got kids present. So it's thinking, does intergenerational just mean all age worship, or does it mean ways in which the different generations are serving together? And for me, that's the kind of richness of what that might look like.
That's great, thank you.
We've got 5 minutes, people. Other thoughts?
I think what you said about the family, the prophetic and the equipped is interesting, because each one is considering a different aspects of being a young person, a teenager. So like the family is recognizing that they're part of a family and that they're not a fully grown adult yet. But then like with the prophetic and the equipped, you're recognizing that they are independent people who make their own decisions and have their own faith, and equipping them is really important because they're, at the end of the day, they're the only person who can affect their own faith. So I think that's really good to challenge like the way that we're thinking about young people. I know in church people often think of like, oh, it's nice being with the kids because they're so young, and it's nice being on a team with older people because you can help them, and then youth just like don't want to go anywhere near it, please. And I think that by separating it into those categories, it makes you reframe how you view your own ministry and how maybe the church could view the youth and young people's ministry as well. Yeah,
thanks, Amelia. It's great. One quick story to share, if people are like, oh, it's just young people or children or whatever, is Naaman's slave girl from the Old Testament. We don't even know her name. But she was the one that said, oh, I know a prophet that can heal you. You know, Naaman's issue with leprosy. And Jesus thinks the story's so significant that he mentions it in the New Testament. And it's in the context of, he says that at that time, the word of the Lord was rare. And then this girl does this, and then the prophet heals. Elijah had never done it before either. So how did she know that there was a prophet that could heal Naaman? It's not a trick question. There is only one solution. God told her. There you go. I'll put you out of your misery. God told her. That's the only way it could have happened, because she'd never seen it. He'd not done it. How did she know? You know, she's Naaman's slave girl. And in that time, if as a slave in a different person, if she'd spoken out of turn, that could have been her life over. But so convinced was she that this could happen. So, you know, and the impact of that was immense. Leads to a whole chapter, you know, because of what she did, speaking up, leads to a whole chapter of stuff around Naaman going into the water, and this isn't how it's supposed to happen, and, you know, I thought you'd come to me instead of just getting me to wash myself, and all the rest of it. All of that, we wouldn't have had it at all had it not been for her speaking up. And then Jesus thinks it's so significant, he mentions it. That's a child, you know, transforming a situation. And how many of the times do our children say, well, I think this, this is what God's saying, just like she did, and we go past it or we miss it as the church. So absolutely, if I was highlighting one of those things particularly, it would probably be the prophetic. We're going to be thrown back out of this room in a moment. Any other thoughts? I want to finish with one quick thing, just to encourage us as we think about what's going forward. So, the Mars thing that's just landed on Mars, the Perseverance rover. I don't know if you get the week, Junior. It's really helpful. It's got loads of great content in it, not just for kids, but I would say for youth work as well. Just covers everything that's going on in contemporary society. I've got to speed up because time is running short. But the phrase "dare mighty things" was written on the code on the parachute as it was dropped. And it goes through this 7 minutes of terror they talk about before they know whether it's actually worked. So drop it through the atmosphere, then they lose contact, and then it's on the planet. But that was on the parachute, dare mighty things, and it's the rover's called Perseverance. I just think we've had to really persevere through this time, but I want to encourage you to dare mighty things for your young people and your youth work going forward. Think families, think the prophetic, think how I'm going to equip them for when they're not with us. That's it. There we go. We're about to leave and be thrown out of here. Thanks for joining me. Hope that's been useful. Have a great rest of your day.